Stand by for broadcast. Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hello, I'm Squadron Leader Peter Lisney, and in this episode we go to RIAT and ask which is best, Chinook or Typhoon?
Yeah, so listen to Prodigy's speed range now, it gets down to 120 knots. That's about as fast as we get during the routine. So we're 0 to 120.
They love to see the high G turns. They like to see the spluff, as they call it, coming off the wing when you do pull those turns, certainly when there's a bit of moisture in the air.
Air Chief Marshal Knighton, Typhoon or Chinook?
Oh, that is such a difficult question.
Also, in this episode, we'll reheat a few stories just in case you missed them. But first, see if you can identify this noise. Find out if you're right at the end of this episode. Now, this week's feature comes to you from the Royal International Air Tattoo at RAF Fairford. As well as hearing about STEM from AS1 Emma Kerwin, we also set Inside Air's newest team member a bit of a challenge. We asked air recruit Chris Keane to find out what aircraft is best, the mighty Chinook helicopter or the multi-role Typhoon jet fighter. Good luck, Chris.
Well, for me, that was a big challenge because I love the Chinook and I love the Typhoon, so having to pick between them was pretty tough. I decided that to make my decision a little easier, I needed to gather some evidence. I wanted to talk to the crowd to get their thoughts, and I wanted to, of course, watch both of the displays. I also wanted to sit down with the pilots of both the Typhoon display team and the Chinook display team and get their personal opinions on who flies the better aircraft. Make sure you stick around for that, by the way, because I think their answers will surprise you. Now, before we get into the whole Chinook or Typhoon debate, let's talk about RIAT itself. This year was set to be an incredible show once again, following on from the success of 2022. The theme this year was Sky Tanker, celebrating 100 years since the first successful air-to-air refuelling between two aircraft back in 1923. There was, of course, so many incredible aircraft to see in the sky, weather permitting, of course, and on the ground as static displays for the public to get up close and personal to. And as well as the aircraft, there were so many things to go and see across the showground too. Talking of which, we sent AS1 Emma Kerwin out to have a look. So where did she get to?
I'm outside what's called the Techno Tent at RIAT. There's loads going on inside it. It's really, really busy. There's nothing related to a dance party about it though. It's actually home to everything related to STEM. That's science, technology, engineering and mathematics. There's loads of different stalls for children and their families to get involved in. There's one where you can make a paper plane, which sounds simple, but if you cast your mind back to when you were a child, I'm sure that you can remember making one yourself and how much fun that was. The point of it here is to show children about aerodynamics. Earlier I caught up with Michelle, an SO3 from the RAF's Youth and STEM team, who's actually leading on that stall. She told me more about what STEM actually is.
These are the subjects that can lead to careers as scientists and engineers, and of course the Royal Air Force being on the cutting edge of technology, we need more engineers. And there is a national shortage of engineers, so if we can actually explain to the next generation why these subjects are important, then perhaps they might consider a career in STEM. To be a part of the world's largest military show, aviation show, is just a sight to be believed. The buzz is amazing. Even though, it is torrential rain outside at the moment, it's not dampening anyone's spirits. And really the fun and the enjoyment and from all of the visitors to RIAT is really lovely.
Have you done it before?
I was here in 2019. And we have expanded our footprint since then, so it's nice to be able to bring more activities and again, have the support of the STEM ambassadors and RAF Cosford STEM team. It's really fantastic.
Why is it important to be able to have this stand here to interact with the younger generation?
there are some instances where some children might not think that STEM is for them, but when they realise there are so many opportunities surrounding science, technology, engineering and maths, and that they can, follow those routes, to study these subjects more if they want to, then it's sort of that believing. And again, having visible role models is incredibly important to inspire the next generation, because if I can't see me, how can I be me?
We'll catch up with Emma again a little bit later on. Right now though, let's get really stuck into the Typhoon or Chinook debate. Now, the weather at RIAT this year was pretty up and down, so to be on the safe side, we headed over to our very fancy Inside Air mobile studio, aka the back of a people carrier. And with me, I had the 2023 Chinook display pilot, Flight Lieutenant Jim Hobkirk, and the 2023 Typhoon display pilot, Flight Lieutenant Matthew Brighty. Thank you both so much for joining us here on Inside Air.
No worries, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, first of all, start with you, Brighty. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm from West Sussex, joined the Air Force in 2007 directly from school. Didn't particularly fancy university, wanted to get straight on with it. Went through, lucky in my mind to go fast jet, and went through the then traditional route through Tutor, Tucano and the Hawk, and then I went to the Tornado GR4 initially, short tour with 617 Squadron before that disbanded, then moved down to Marham to 9 Squadron, did another 3 years with them, and then came across the Typhoon in 2017 with 11 Squadron initially, and then moved across to 29 Squadron, which is where I am now as a QFI, instructing new guys and girls coming through the OCU.
And Jim, what about yourself?
So I'm from Stamford in Lincolnshire, but my father is a sport helicopter pilot in the Royal Air Force, so I've grown up with helicopters. So it's all I've ever wanted to do. I'm that lucky bloke who's doing exactly what I wanted to do when I was 4 years old. So joined slightly before Brighty in 1989, then went straight through, and again, straight from A-levels, did university, straight through training, and my first tour was in Northern Ireland, and thereafter I've essentially been frontline all the way through to 2003 when I went to Shawbury to become an instructor. Did a tour up there, and then came back to the Chinook Force, examined on all sport helicopter types, did a tour on the 32 the Royal Squadron, which was brilliant, and then went back to Shawbury as a Central Flying School examiner. I can see Brighty wincing already. Yeah, so examining all instructors on all military types, rotary, that is, so that was great. Decided I'd done enough sort of second line stuff, so I came back to the Chinook Force, volunteered in 2016, and have been on 18 Squadron since then. I was one of the instructors bringing the new guys on.
So let's kick it straight off, because we're going to be talking about your aircraft, comparing the two. Let's kick it straight off with who's got the best aircraft.
Yeah.
I would definitely say the Chinook, obviously, but you're comparing chalk and cheese, really, aren't you?
Absolutely.
The Chinook excels as a battlefield helicopter, and the Typhoon excels at whizzing around looking pretty.
Yeah. So I love flying Typhoon, but I'd like to have gone around all the different types of fleets if possible. Mm-hmm. I'd love to have a go on helicopters and multi-engine if the chance arose, but obviously that's just not the way it goes. I've had 2 flights in Chinooks actually, and I probably shouldn't say this, but it's actually 2 of the best flights I've ever had.
Wow.
One in the Falklands as a 15-year-old when my dad was based down there for a year, and one in North Wales actually at night. It was fantastic. Yeah, really, really cool flying. So
I dread to ask when was that Falklands flight?
About 2003.
Ooh. Might have been me.
Yeah.
Makes you feel old.
It was awesome. Yeah.
So to get to where you are now, obviously the training is incredibly tough to become a pilot, but to become a display pilot, explain to us how that happened and how you got here.
I was determined to do this job. I really wanted to do this job, so I made sure I came back to 29 Squadron, which is where the display team operates from, and then straight into application process essentially from the first year I got there, knowing that it was probably unrealistic to get it too early on, but got it my 3rd time. So I was beaten to it by Sainty and Paddy respectively. So it was just sort of that determination to keep going back. Spent lots of time in the sim to kind of get better at that kind of flying, such that when we came to an interview and a flying test in the simulator, I was kind of as well prepared as I could be for that. So typically we do the previous year's sequence in the simulator, just to kind of see if you've got that kind of basic handling ability, I guess, and kind of a test of your dedication to have kind of learnt it and practiced it. Yeah.
In my head, I've kind of got Top Gun.
No, it was a bit more relaxed than that. So we do a written piece just to kind of state your motivation and why you want to do it, and then into the interview again, kind of going into the rules and regs, motivation to do it, your background, and then that flying test. But no, it's quite gentlemanly.
Slightly less piano playing in a pub.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Jim, how did you get to be a display pilot?
Much like Brady, it's something I've always wanted to do. Early on in my Chinook career, it wasn't really appropriate because of security clearances and stuff we were doing. So I'm now essentially in my last couple of years on the Chinook. So it just makes sense. I'm going back to Shawbury probably towards the end of 24. Sort of finish my career instructing. So yeah, always wanted to do it. Waited for the right time. Put my application in last year when the instructors, because we do it slightly differently. We don't do it the OCU where the frontline squadrons do it, bouncing between 18 and 27. This year it's 18 squadrons turn. So sort of about this time last year, the boss put the request out. Yeah, who fancies it? I put myself forward, and I think a lot of the judgment really on who to do it was experience, ability, but also we're still deployed. Yeah, at the moment 18 squadron are deployed on ops. So they just had to look at that schedule, and as one of the instructors on T flight, as we call it, training flight, not scheduled to deploy, I think it was a fairly easy choice for the boss for me to take it up. Similar to Brighty, we then obviously do lots of training, simulator trips, and then flying with last year's display pilot Schmitty, who ran me through the routine. Because we were fairly late into deciding that display was actually going to happen because of the ops of the Chinook, JHC were very concerned about them going, so we didn't really decide it was going to happen for definite until April. So I had about 4 weeks work-up period flying every day to get done. So I'm flying the same routine essentially that Schmitty did last year. We didn't have time to make the adjustments. That said, it's a great routine. It won the best display last year at RIAT. So really looking forward to displaying today.
Looking out the window, the weather has not been on our side so far. I did see the Typhoon display yesterday, and I saw a Chinook, but I'm not sure if it was the display.
So we arrived yesterday. We did a practice display at ODM and then arrived, and we were never on the display schedule. It was only a very short display window yesterday, and I think they concentrated on the big ticket items, the foreign teams and the big teams, and obviously squeezed Brighty in as well. But yeah, really looking forward to displaying this afternoon and showing everyone what the Chinook can do.
With the weather being so up and down as it is, how does that affect your displays?
So I've got 3 different routines to cater for a lower cloud base. So I need 3,500 feet to do my full display, 1,500 to do a rolling or a limited display, and then 1,000 feet to do the flat. So yesterday, as I was sat at the holding point, I was told the weather would actually fit probably to a rolling display, but quite quickly realised that it closed in, so I had to change it to a flat display. So we've kind of got those in the back pocket should the weather deteriorate.
I'm obviously much less stressed about the cloud than Brighty is, so my full display is 1,000 feet. The flat display that we've now designed and was approved last week actually is a 500-foot cloud base, but hopefully that won't happen because we'd probably be about the only team displaying if that were to happen. Big problem for us today in the Chinook is the wind. Not take off like the fixed wing guys because they're obviously stuck on runways. They're limited by that. Not just that obviously, but for us it's starting the rotors. With the rotors at a slow speed they can go up and down, and then there's a danger of them striking the fuselage. So as we speak my engineers are pointing the aircraft in the correct direction. We have safe directions and unsafe directions, so but we should be okay for this afternoon.
And regardless of the weather, QRA, quick reaction alerts, you have to go out in any type of weather because it's needed and it's critical. Tell us a little bit about QRA, what it is and how it works.
Yeah, so we've got 2 aircraft down at Coningsby and up at RAF Lossiemouth in North Scotland, ready to go 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, with 2 pilots and a team of engineers at both of those locations, with the spare aircraft as backup, ready to respond to any domestic threat or potentially other nations, coming into our airspace.
And yourself, Jim, with the Chinook, heavily involved in MACA, military aid to civilian authorities, heavily involved in lots of that, always on the news. Probably very recognisable was the Whaley Bridge incident.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about MACA.
So to give back to the UK population is a good feeling. We're used to, it's synonymous with the battlefield, but back in the UK, to be able to give that support to the UK population, flooding in North Yorkshire, for example, we were there rebuilding dikes, and like you say, the Whaley Bridge, famously just rebuilding that dam wall, dropping underslung loads in. We feel it's really important. But there's a Chinook, not quite as fast reaction as the QRA, always on notice to move down at Odium, again, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and that's national standby, ready for anything, hopefully, that won't be needed.
And tell us about MERT as well.
So MERT, the Medical Evacuation Response Team, famously we were doing that in Afghanistan, and doctors and the people's statisticians will say that the number of troops who survived life-changing injuries that traditionally they would not have survived was drastically improved because of us being able to get airborne in all weathers and carry the surgery effectively onto the battlefield, pick up the troops, and then whilst we were going back to the hospital at Camp Bastion, we had surgeons, doctors operating on those casualties in the back of the aircraft. It was humbling to see the stuff they did, and humbling to see those young soldiers, what they went through, and just made you feel great to be able to help them out.
Absolutely. Now, shortly we're going to be finding out what inspired Jim and Brighty to become pilots and join the Royal Air Force. But before we do, let's catch back up with AS1 Emma Kerwin.
Earlier, I told you about the activities taking place inside the Techno Tent. There's also some really interesting talks and Q&As taking place, including with Major Tim Peake. He's really passionate about STEM, and I've managed to have a chat with him. But before you hear that chat, we're going to hear from former Flight Lieutenant Mandy Hickson. Now, she was an RAF fast jet pilot, and she told me engineers are so important for pilots to be able to do their job.
They are the lifeblood, to be honest. And what do we often say? Is it 2,000 people that it takes to launch an aircraft on the front line? It's certainly not about just the pilot, and it never has been. And for myself and my experiences, working with the engineers, your life is in their hands every single day that you go to work. And when we tie ourselves with regulations and compliance and those magic words, there's a reason that they are the lifeblood, because if these guys decide to do it in their own way, then obviously the pilot's life can be on the line. But the trust that you end up basically building up within that team is phenomenal.
How do we increase that number of engineers and also target women to consider that as a career?
Well, I think basically what we're looking at lots of the companies that we're seeing here today, everyone from, GE, Raytheon, there's, BAE Systems, there's so many of them. Many of them are really looking at that covenant and the women in defence side of things. But also there's such an active pull on getting women into engineering. They are such an untapped pool at the moment. And for myself, in my own experience, I spoke at the centenary of the Women's Engineering Society a couple of years ago, and I was asked to judge all these projects by graduates, young female graduates. And what really stood out for myself, I had my goddaughter with me at the time, and she was debating a career in economics, or did she go into engineering? But every single one that we spoke to was absolutely passionate about what they do. And I said, are you going to get that passion in accountancy or economics? And I don't think you do. And I think that's what we really tend to see, is that the people that choose actively to go into engineering, they do tend to be truly passionate about the projects that they're working on, about creating really positive change for the future as well. And we certainly saw that coming out talking to the two young female engineers that we had on the stage today, Christina and Danielle.
What do you think about the way that these STEM subjects are taught? Obviously the RAF and other people in that tent are shining that spotlight on it, but what about outside of RIAT?
Yeah, outside of RIAT, we're seeing a lot of work. For example, the RAF Charitable Trust, who organise the International Air Tattoo, and they use a lot of their influence to, actually encourage a lot of STEM projects within schools as well, and that's what they'll put their focus on. And I think it's really interesting, because I grew up in an all-girls school, and in those days there was no focus on STEM. Well, why? Because you didn't have to, because if a girl enjoyed doing physics, chemistry, these traditional STEM subjects, well, they just did them, and they didn't know there was this tradition of that's more male orientated or more towards the male brain than the female brain. And so actually we had a huge proportion of girls doing physics as A-level, and maths and pure maths and all of those subjects. In fact, they were full, those subjects, and they couldn't almost take any more people on to do those subjects at my A-levels. And so it's a really interesting one, and I think now we've gone across to obviously being co-ed in most schools. That's when we've actually started to see the problem, and it's been amplified, because of course once you then get to A-levels and you're in a mixed class, if a girl goes into the classroom and she's only a very small percentage of those people doing physics as an A-level, she might be turned off from doing that. So it's really about tapping into the brain to make people realise just what an exciting career this is and how adaptable it is. Engineering is not getting dirty and just working with engines. It's so much more far-reaching than that. And especially when you think about sustainability projects and all of that side of things, this is a really exciting area to be in. I think one of the problems we see as well is because the armed forces have shrunk so much and we recruit less and less people, is that it's not had such a big presence in people's lives. And I think actually creating those role models though of giving that visibility on things like Armed Forces Day, where we actually see people in uniform marching down a street, stuff like that.
Do you think that the RAF, like just personnel on the ground, like we have a responsibility as well in trying to shine that light?
I do, yeah, absolutely. And I just think you can't be what you can't see. That visibility, I think it's really important that, I think when I was serving in the Air Force, I didn't see it like that. I did not want a spotlight shined upon me, and I just kept my head down and wanted to do my job. And it's only actually on leaving the Air Force that I recognised that I have a responsibility to the next generation to ensure that that ladder is not just down for others to follow in my footsteps, but actually it's rooted on the ground and people can flow up it. And I think we are seeing so many more girls going into engineering. I'm certainly seeing more women going into flying as well these days, is because actually all of those pilots that joined however many years ago are now out the other end and are now talking openly about their experiences.
So the next time we catch up with Emma, she's going to be with an incredible guest. I'm talking out of this world. Quite literally, she's going to be with Major Tim Peake. But right now, let's get back into the conversation with Jim and Brighty and find out what inspired them to become pilots in the Royal Air Force.
Like Jim, my dad was in the Air Force, still is actually as a reservist up at Lossiemouth, so I kind of grew up around it. So yeah, I always knew I wanted to join up. So I was a member of the Air Cadets, and then I toyed with going to university, but I was determined to give it a go first time round and see if they'd accept me. And I'm happy that I did join when I did. I've had a great career up to now, and like most things, recruitment comes in peaks and troughs, so I count myself lucky that I joined when I did in terms of pilot numbers. But there's nothing else I'd see myself doing, no.
What inspired you to become a pilot?
My dad was already flying and was flying all the way through my childhood. Much like Brighty, I was in the Air Cadets. Really important for people who are seriously considering coming into the Air Force. The Air Cadets is a really good way of seeing what we do, getting involved, coming into camps, getting flying, and just experiencing some of that to help you inform your choice. It's also really good on your CV, if we're honest. So when you're going along to recruitment selection, if you've shown that sort of commitment already, it's easier for the Air Force to think, oh yeah, this is someone we can rely on, albeit it's not a mandatory. But yeah, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I'm sort of concerned as I'm dashing up with 7.5 years to retirement about what I'm actually going to do with the rest of my life. I'm sure I'll find something.
And I always like to ask this question. I was also an Air Cadet and I always wanted to join the RAF as well. If you could transport yourself back in time to talk to your 10-year-old self, what would your 10-year-old self think about where you are right now?
Yeah, I think he'd be chuffed, yeah. I don't think I'd ever imagine being here. So certainly to do the display job, count myself very lucky. I love coming to air shows, so to be at RIAT is really special. Never in a million years thought I'd be displaying the Typhoon, so yeah, absolutely loving it.
Yeah, 10-year-old me, I'd have to give myself a good talking to, work harder. Yeah, but I look back now, I think probably results weren't as good as they could have been, so I think 10-year-old me would be very, very happy with today and the last 30-odd years. So it's a great job.
And obviously loads of youngsters come to RIAT every year. I'm sure many aspiring to be pilots. Do you think with the younger generation playing on video games, will that help them?
I think it will with the new aircraft that are coming to service. Certainly in the fast jet world, I can't speak for the rotaries as well, but refer to it as the computer generation. I think it's going to be a lot more prevalent as we go into unmanned aerial vehicles more so. So yeah, I think they're very well placed.
Yeah. Talking to you both, obviously you've had an incredible career to get to where you are to now be display pilots. How do you better this?
Yes, difficult to be honest. I'm struggling.
Yeah,
I can't think of anything better than being a display pilot. It's immensely good fun. You can never take that away. Obviously, we talk about the honour and the privilege, and that's all is given. But yeah, it's just great fun. And meeting the public all day long, and at shows like this is again humbling, interesting. Yeah, there's always someone with a question you've never heard before, so can put you on your back foot. So it's just good fun.
Yeah, I'm hoping potentially to go on to other display jobs. I'd love to be on the Battle of Britain memorial flight one day. So obviously that's at Coningsby, so it's really cool to see that day in, day out. So that's certainly on my list. Going to be a tough one to get, as I say, not many jobs going, but keep my nose to the grindstone, you never know one day.
And what's it like actually displaying? Obviously you're like rock stars here, because you can see the crowd, I'm sure, from up there. What's it like actually displaying and showing them people what you can do?
I don't know about you, Jim. I personally try not to look at the crowds too much, to not put me off and make me more nervous, So I guess I'm going that much quicker as well. So I don't really kind of take in the crowd that much, unfortunately, other than at the start and the finish. Mainly not to try and put me off.
Yeah, likewise. I think the only time we're really going to see the crowd is our arrival. I'm straight towards the crowd, and I think because we're coming in at low level, as we get closer and closer, the RIAT's a huge site. It's just going to build in the windscreen, and that's going to be pretty awe-inspiring. Once we're in the display, I'm looking at numbers, I'm looking at markers, I'm really just concentrating inside the aircraft. We do our sideways trawl where the crewman stands on the ramp and we face the crowd and he's waving.
Yeah.
So at that point I get to have a bit of a relax because it's sideways hover taxiing, not that tricky. And I think at that stage probably the enormity of what I'm doing will hit me. But then straight back into whizzing around and showing off the aeroplane. So we don't really notice the crowd that much and certainly can't hear them. So yeah.
I think one of the highlights, I come to RIAT quite a lot with my family, and one of the highlights of seeing the Chinook display, or the Chinook display, is the big red hand at the back.
Yeah, people see that. It's iconic. It's our unique selling point. Yeah. I'm waiting for Brighty to get big orange gloves. But yeah.
Good idea.
For his slow pass.
Good try.
I'm not quite sure how they'd fit in the cockpit though. Right, a question I'm sure you're dying to know the answer to is how to pronounce Chinook, right? Well, if you weren't, then you are now. Is it Chinook or Chinook? Well, we have an actual Chinook display team pilot to answer that question for us. First though, as promised, let's head back over to Emma, who is with a very special guest.
Now you're going to hear from Major Tim Peake. Of course, he's an astronaut who went to space. He's also a former Apache pilot. He told me that STEM subjects are the backbone of these careers. I managed to spend a few minutes with him, and I asked him why he wants to inspire children into science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Of course, I asked him a little bit about space as well.
I think what's really important is that we get kids into STEM as soon as possible, at the youngest age, and also we make sure that we keep it as diverse as possible. What we're finding actually is there's a great uptake in STEM subjects amongst primary school children, and then actually at GCSE level as well. But at A levels, we're still not getting as many female students taking up STEM A level subjects. So there seems to be a bit of a drop off there, and perhaps that is because that's when people start looking towards future careers, and that becomes more important, and university subjects if that's the way you want to go. So I think it's really important that we try and get industry and academia joined together, and the government needs to help do that as well.
These subjects are really important in the military as well, aren't they? There's so many different careers that people could go into.
Yeah, they're important for everyday life, and that's why I think it's so important, because even if you're not interested in going into a science engineering kind of career, we are finding ourselves surrounded by technology more and more these days, and I think it's just going to be an advantage. It's going to keep doors open if you do have a background in some kind of STEM subject. Whatever line of work you go into, there is going to be an element of technology involved.
Did you take up maths when you were at school, and did that help you get into the military and then onto your space career? What was your journey?
I did maths, physics and chemistry at A level. I didn't do particularly well. I didn't get great grades at all, but I left school, became a pilot with the Army Air Corps, and actually that's when I've never stopped studying really. Flight and aviation was my passion, and I went on to become a test pilot. I did a degree in flight dynamics much later in life, and I had to get up to degree level mathematics in order to complete the test pilot course. So I've always studied, and then becoming an astronaut was an endless 10-year period of studying as well. But I love it. I like learning. I like finding out more information about things that I'm passionate about. So that's really my journey, and I think that's people study at different times in their lives. People learn at different times in their lives, and I think it's important to tell people as well, if you're not perhaps doing that well at school, it doesn't matter so much. There's always opportunities in the future to catch up.
With the military side of things in flying, being a pilot, I just wondered, when you were learning maths and doing your physics and things, was that ever in your head that one day I could be a pilot, and was the link there? Because it certainly wouldn't have been for me when I was at school.
Not at school, and I think that's why perhaps I didn't do so well at school that I could have done. But as soon as I started flying and I was able to apply maths and physics to a very real problem, as how does an aircraft work, how do engines work, and really that was what I was passionate about, and so that's when I was able to make that association, and it all became relevant. So I think if we can try and make these subjects as relevant as possible to school kids, then it is going to be easier for them to understand things. as I mentioned before, everything in life is becoming more technical. In the military, we need those skills as well. We need people who understand cyber, who understand coding. We need them to have a STEM kind of background. So it doesn't matter if you want to be a pilot or if you want to be a technician or an engineer, whatever you're going to go and do, then studying these things at school is always useful, and it will just give you those opportunities for the future.
Space is becoming such an important thing in the military. Certainly something that we've been talking about in the RAF, like on my media team, a lot more. What is that role?
Space is becoming really important to our critical national infrastructure, our security, our communications, navigation, weather forecasting, climate change, so many things. And we need to be able to protect those assets. And that's where the Space Force comes in, the MOD come in. We need to make sure that we can continue to operate safely in space.
Does space debris have a big part to play on that?
Space debris is a huge problem, absolutely. So there's two things we need to do. Firstly, we need to stop putting any more up there. And actually, there are a lot of companies and governments and agencies that are working towards that. And then we also need to try and clean up what's already up there. And again, in the UK, we're actually leading the rest of the world in some of those technologies of how to deorbit and how to bring down pieces of space debris. But if we do continue to pollute space with countries doing things like anti-satellite missile testing that turns one old satellite, one piece of debris, into 100,000 pieces of debris, we're going to make space completely unusable for everybody, and we're going to surround ourselves in a blanket of debris and be trapped on the planet, and that's not what anybody needs.
Because it's so dangerous, isn't it?
All the debris is travelling at 17,500 miles per hour, so the smallest fragments can rip through a spacecraft. That's what makes it such a challenge.
Now, Major Tim Peake told me he's really keen to inspire the next generation of engineers, pilots and more. So he might be pleased to know this young man has definitely been enjoying getting involved in all the activities to do with STEM at RIAT inside the Techno Tent.
My name is Charlie and I'm 7 years old. I've been up to playing games on the laptop, playing on a jet and a helicopter.
What do you like the best? What's cool about them?
The jet because it's easier to fly, and because you get to go upside down.
Yeah, you do.
And you landed smoothly.
That's it from me outside the Techno Tent. I'm going to go back in now and start having a little bit of fun myself. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Emma. Right, let's get down to that all-important question.
Jim, just to put this to bed once and for all, is it pronounced Chinook or Chinook?
Chris, now you're asking the Shrewsbury question, aren't you? I say Chinook, but it's actually named after a wind that comes down from the Rockies in America and a Native American Indian tribe. So you'd probably have to ask them, but for me it's definitely Chinook.
So what would you say is your favourite part of the display?
The arrival. It's just, you're coming in and the adrenaline is up and you just get that moment just in that first pull-up of sort of, here we go. It's just that. From there on, you are concentrating, you're working really hard to put on a good show, make everything as accurate and as safe as possible. It's just that split second as the pull-up starts, that's probably a pretty exciting moment.
Yeah, I tend to agree actually. Obviously going to be displaying from takeoff here at RIAT. I certainly enjoy arrivals at other shows. I like my high-speed passes, so I get down to 100 feet. Mm-hmm. I quite enjoy my slow roll. It's something that a British Typhoon's never done in a display, and actually requires a bit of extra kind of piloting skill maybe. I have a smile on my face throughout most of it, to be honest.
For people listening to this that are going to be watching your display, tell us something that they might not know about your display.
So, I'll take the aircraft down to about 120 knots in a slow speed pass, and I'll get as fast as 600 knots. When I accelerate from about 250, maybe 300 to 600, takes a matter of seconds for the high speed passes. But yeah, I really take it from both ends of the performance scale to really kind of show off all of the handling characteristics and its performance characteristics, other than obviously maximum heights and the like. But
yeah, so listening to Brighty's speed range there, it gets down to 120 knots. That's about as fast as we get during the routine. So we're 0 to 120. I think the bit people don't realise is when we're doing that sideways troll with a crewman, I've actually at that point plugged in the autopilot that the new aircraft has been fitted with about 6 years ago. Oh, yeah. So I can effectively hands off at that point and just chill out for a minute or two. I tend to keep my hands really close to the controls, but the computer at that point is driving the aircraft. So it's a nice break for me, because flying the display is physically exhausting. Not to Brighty's levels, but we do pull up to to 2.5G for quite a lot of our manoeuvres, which is quite a lot for a helicopter. So yeah, it's nice to have that break halfway through.
And when you land, I'm sure you've done a few Q&As in your time. What is the most interesting or the weirdest question you've been asked by a member of the public?
You'd be amazed at the number of people who ask which pilot flies which head. Because obviously Chinook's got 2 rotor heads, and they're convinced that one pilot's flying one head and one's flying the other.
Wow.
Which would be an immense crew resource management challenge, especially if we argue about which direction to go.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the strangest. One I've had a lot this year. Unfortunately, not doing the Lancaster arrival here at RIAT, but I've done it at a number of other shows. And a lot of people say, how is it to fly that slow behind the Lancaster? And actually, it's relatively comfortable. I'm back at about 150 knots, 150, 160 knots, and it's awesome to be behind that aircraft. A real honour. In the moment, it's quite stressful because you know, obviously got this iconic aircraft in front of you quite close. But that's certainly been a special part of this year. Just disappointed not doing it here this weekend.
And do you find that they have a kind of favourite, so they're like, wow, I love it when you do this?
I say the Lancaster arrival has been a big talking point. They love to see the high G turns. They like to see the spluff, as they call it, coming off the wing when you do pull those turns, certainly when there's a bit of moisture in the air. So people often comment on that, and that often gives the best pictures.
What people know more about us is the noise. Comment on the blade slap, and that's our tagline, hashtag blade slap. Unfortunately today I think the wind is going to be blowing the noise away from the crowd, so they might not get it so well. But yeah, that's what people talk about, just the bang 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 of the rotors as they compress the air at the top of the fuselage is what actually makes that noise. So yeah, that's good.
Awesome. So the main part of this podcast is, as I said earlier, to kind of compare the two aircraft, and you kind of did it at the start, Brighty, but I'd like you to talk about each other's aircraft now. So what is your favourite part of the Chinook?
It's a special aircraft, isn't it? Your load carrying capacity is pretty special. There's not many aircraft that can carry as many troops and cargo as you can in our service. Certainly the performance is pretty stunning. I say that trip I had in the Falklands really opened my eyes as to what the aircraft's capable of. I remember being sat on the ramp actually with the load masters either side, pulled up into quite a steep climb and then bunted over the top with just a little strop round my waist. I thought I was going to fall out the back of the aircraft. I was looking down. I was just stunned by how much you can throw the aircraft around, and obviously that's evident when you see the display. So it's quite something for such a big helicopter. Yeah.
And what's your favourite part of the Typhoon?
Oh, I mean, the paint scheme's nice, isn't it? No, I think at Bournemouth last year I watched the guys doing the sunset display, and when you've got the afterburners on and the twin carrots as people talk about it, that's really impressive. The noise, I seem to be talking noise a lot. Last year's Chinook display team had their tagline of "Jet noise is boring." I mean, it's pretty antisocial, but it's not boring. So that rumble, and you can feel it through your body. Your body sort of rumbles with that. I mean, that's great. Other than that, he's just whizzing backwards and forwards. So, yeah. The vertical climb, the vertical departure, it was always nice. I'm not sure he's going to manage it today with the cloud base, sadly, but that's good. I watched you at Falmouth, actually. I was 5 miles out to sea at 100 feet.
Of course, yes.
Because you warmed up for me on that day. And just watching him sort of disappear up towards the gods, spinning, that's pretty impressive.
So they clearly both like each other's aircraft, but how much do they actually know about each other's aircraft? Well, we're going to put them through a little quiz shortly. Before we do that though, as I mentioned at the start of this podcast, my challenge at RIAT this year was to find out which aircraft people preferred. I even asked the boss.
Air Chief Marshal Knighton, Typhoon or Chinook?
Oh, that is such a difficult question. So I've flown in both, and my PSO is looking at me who flew Chinook, so I'm definitely therefore going to say Typhoon.
So that's what the Chief of the Air Staff thinks. Let's now find out what a few members of the public think.
Oh, good question. I think I'm going to go with Typhoon. It's wicked. The pilots are awesome. I aspire to be like them.
I'd go with Chinook just because, like, watching the Chinook display teams and that, the things that they're doing with a helicopter such as a Chinook is just absolutely amazing, and it's one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen.
Chinook, because it's really cool and I've flown in one and the pilots are just awesome.
I definitely go Typhoon all the way because I touched one at Lossiemouth once. It was just a great experience.
Typhoon, because it replaced my favourite aircraft, which was a Tornado, so I like fast jets more than I do helicopters.
The Chinook. I love the sound it makes. The waka waka waka. It's absolutely superb noise. Plus I've also had a flight in one, so I'm quite partial.
Right, quiz time. Let's find out how much Chinook display pilot Jim knows about the Typhoon and how much Typhoon display pilot Brighty knows about the Chinook.
So, Brighty, we'll start with you. How many blades does the Chinook have?
6.
Spot on. Yeah.
Spot on.
Thank God.
Started easy.
How many wings is a Typhoon?
Jim, how many engines does a Typhoon have?
Oh, it's 2. Yeah, I've got a good friend who's just started flying the Typhoon, and he's very excited. He's now flying an aircraft with more engines than seats for the first time in his career.
Brilliant. So 1-1. Brighty, according to the Royal Air Force website, what is the payload of the Chinook in kilograms?
Oh, I'm going to really embarrass myself here. I'll go 12,000.
What's the answer, Jim?
There is no definite answer to that. It's how long is a piece of string? Every aircraft weighs different, and in theatre, when we've got armour, the aircraft is fully armoured. The aircraft can be 15.5 tonnes, so we've got a maximum lift of 24.5 tonnes. So obviously we could only lift, do the maths there, about 9 tonnes or so. In the UK, we can lift 12.5 tonnes. So Brighty was very close to 12,000.
I'll take that.
Yeah. Well, I have 10,000 kilograms, or up to 55 troops.
Definitely up to 55 troops. Yeah, we struggle with seats, albeit famously in the Falklands. I think they lifted over 100 Gurkhas, stood up. They just folded all the seats up and just rammed them in, stood up. Wow. So yeah, once you run out of seats.
Jim, question for you: what is the maximum altitude of the Typhoon?
35,000 feet.
55.
55. Yeah. Bang on. And your last questions, Brighty, what is the maximum cruising speed in knots of the Chinook?
So I feel like I might have already heard that today. So I'm going to say 120, but I suspect, can you get a bit more out of that?
Much more,
so I'll say,
yes,
yeah. I'll go 170.
Oh, it's pretty close. 160.
Yep.
Yeah.
160.
You'd be shaking your teeth out of your head. Yeah, it's pretty uncomfortable. We tend to cruise about 135, 140.
Does it get quite shaky?
Yeah, very, very shaky. Yeah.
I was actually talking to a Merlin pilot yesterday, and they said that they had a button called the Chinook button.
Yes.
So if they turned the Chinook button on, it started to shake.
They've got an active vibration system in their head that smooths it out. It basically operates in opposition to their vibration, makes the Merlin very, very smooth. So it's actually very good for medical evacuation. Unfortunately, they haven't got the payload. But yeah, if they turn that off, they say that's their Chinook simulator.
Yeah. So Jim, final question for you. What is the maximum speed of the Typhoon?
In knots or Mach?
Mach.
Ooh. Do you know, I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to go with 2.3.
1.8.
1.8.
Oh. Yeah.
I feel like I've lost that. It's about to get very noisy. As the F-35 comes to the hover, with I think a Harrier coming to hover behind it.
So I had a tiebreaker.
Go on.
I'm going to ask you it anyway. Before I do, Jim, what is the maximum takeoff weight of the Chinook?
Maximum takeoff weight is 24.5 tonnes, 24,500 kilograms.
Okay, and Brighty, what is the maximum takeoff weight of the Typhoon?
Very similar, actually, 23 tonnes.
I always knew they were lightweights.
So you kind of see where I'm going with this. The tiebreaker is, what is the maximum takeoff weight of the C-17 in kilograms?
I'm going to go for 160,000 kilograms.
Okay.
So if I go 1 kilo under and I'm closer, do I play that game? I'll go 140.
140?
Yeah.
You said 160.
I did.
So, Jim, you're the winner. It was actually 265,350.
Wow.
So,
That's
still quite off, but...
Yeah.
Now, I never thought I'd find myself in the back of a people carrier doing a pop quiz with a Typhoon display pilot and a Chinook display pilot whilst an F-35 hovers in the background. It was quite a surreal moment, almost as good as watching the displays themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Squad Leader James Saint, and it's a huge privilege to bring to you the 2023 Typhoon display here at RIAT. This year's RAF Typhoon display, call sign Anarchy 1, is piloted by Flight Lieutenant Matt Brighty, a qualified flying instructor on 29 Squadron based at RAF Coningsby.
Absolutely incredible seeing Brighty in the sky doing his thing. We also had a sneaky glimpse into the cockpit of Jim during his Chinook display.
Ready? Enter. Now. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 degrees. Now. Horizon 20, 40, 55. 500 feet. 40 degrees nose down, 400 feet. Speed increase to 90 feet.
Well, I'm not sure about you, but I still can't decide which I prefer. I love the Chinook and I love the Typhoon equally. However, what I can do is leave you with some final words from Jim and Brighty, who can tell you what to expect when you see them in the air this year.
Hopefully I've got a bit of everything in there. Like Jim said, the noise is a big part of the theatre, so I try and make the best of that, point the reheat at the crowd as much as possible. I say show off the slow speed handling characteristics of the aircraft right up to max speed I'm allowed for the display, 600 knots. Show off the manoeuvrability of the aircraft and its agility with numerous 9G turns, and then show acceleration and the specific excess power we've got to really accelerate the aircraft down the display line.
Very much similar sort of thing, yeah. Noise, drama, performance, speed, slow speed, a little bit of humour, human interaction with the crewman waving off the ramp. We like to think we've got everything in there. So yeah, come along and enjoy the show.
Brilliant. Well, Flight Lieutenant Matthew Brighty and Flight Lieutenant Jim Hobkirk, thank you so much for coming on Inside Air.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I'm AS1 Victoria Andrews with Reheat for Inside Air. The LGBT Veterans Independent Review has been published, examining the effect of the historic policy prohibiting homosexuality in the UK Armed Forces between 1967 and 2000. The government issued a formal apology, while the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Defence Secretary Ben Wallace made statements in the House of Commons. Defence has accepted the principles behind the recommendations and will work with networks, charities and the LGBT veteran community to ensure the measures delivered are appropriate and will have an enduring impact for LGBT veterans and personnel. A joint vision statement has been signed between the heads of the Royal Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force and the United States Air Force, setting out their mutual intent to work collaboratively on the development of their country's Wedgetail airborne early warning and control aircraft. The trilateral agreement is a commitment by the three nations to work together for mutual benefit through cooperation relating to Wedgetail capability development, evaluation and testing, interoperability, sustainment, operations, training and safety. The RAF is joining air forces across the globe in commemorating 100 years of air-to-air refuelling. The concept, the cornerstone of air mobility and air power, was pioneered in June 1923 in the USA and has evolved over the last century. The ability to refuel in flight enables air assets to stay on task for longer and to fly further, providing the required flexibility and versatility to achieve mission success. And finally, the Royal Air Force Mountain Rescue Service has marked 80 years of service. A blue light emergency service, they provide medical aid in the mountains, whether rescuing downed aircrew, missing military personnel or civilians. Since their inception in 1943, the Mountain Rescue Service has rescued and saved many lives at aircraft post-crash and incident management call-outs and by assisting civilian mountain rescue teams. That's Reheat on Inside Air.
I'm AS1 Simon Ross with this episode's Name That Noise. That was the sound of an Embraer Phenom T Mark I from 45 Squadron, number 3 Flying Training School based at Royal Air Force Cranwell, undertaking a go-around from an approach with gear down and then retracting on the climb. 45 Squadron, as part of UK Military Flying Training System, trains all multi-engine pilots, mission aircrew and airborne specialists destined for the multi-engine front line. It utilises the Phenom as its training aircraft, which has a maximum operating altitude of 41,000 feet, a cruising speed of 275 knots, or Mach 0.7, and a range of over 1,100 nautical miles. As a training platform, the Phenom is ideally suited to prepare aircrew for the operating environment of the multi-engine front line. Upon completion, aircrew continue their training on their selected multi-engine platforms, such as the C-17 Globemaster, A400 Atlas, A330 Voyager, Poseidon MRA-1, Rivet Joint, Shadow, and in the future, the E-7 Wedgetail AEW-1.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.